Hello, welcome to the Big Strategy Podcast. I'm your host and fellow strategist, Jeff Eyet. This is your go-to spot for real talk with the masterminds of business strategy. It's about sharing stories, insights, and those little nuggets of wisdom to help you unlock big growth. Let's turn the key and spring into action.
Well, welcome everyone to this episode of the Big Strategy Podcast. I'm your host, Jeff Eyet, and I'm honored today to be joined by a fellow Cal Bear, Nate Fuller, who I met while he was working with Bechtel here in the Bay Area, but he has a long career before and after, which I will let him introduce. So, Nate, welcome to the podcast.
Yeah, great to be here. Thanks, Jeff. Good to see you again. It's been a minute.
Great to see you. This was I hate to say this, but you moved away, and I think the last time I saw you was pre-COVID. So this is
definitely
great.
Pre-COVID. Yeah, how's Berkeley these days?
Yeah, that's a loaded question. I'll hit pause and answer that. But no, it's great, and that's really what I'm hoping to get out of today's conversation is, a bit about your career journey up until this point, but then very quickly we're going to get into a bit about culture change and just cultures adopting new technologies, particularly in some traditional industries like construction. So that's a little tickle for those who may be thinking about sitting down with this episode. So before we get into that, though, Nate, walk us through a little bit about your career arc and what got you to the point you're at today.
Yeah. So if folks aren't familiar, Bechtel is a large construction company. They were based in the Bay Area, which is where I worked and where I met Jeff a number of years ago. But they're currently based out east in Washington, D.C. area. But Bechtel is a large international construction company, and I spent close to 10 years of my early career with them, kind of traveling all over the world on big Bechtel projects, working with project management, construction management teams. I'm an engineer by training. I got my degree at Cal in civil engineering a while ago at this point, but quickly put my degree to work at Bechtel. But then, careers happen and you kind of move out of engineering and into different roles. And so I had the opportunity around 2015, 2016 timeframe to help build the Office of Innovation at Bechtel. And, folks might be a little familiar with construction. It's one of those industries that is definitely, I think innovating and changing rapidly, at least at this point in time. But, in 2015, it was a whole different story. I think the industry was caught pretty flat-footed by a lot of the new and emerging technology that was coming down the pipeline that we're seeing kind of the fruition of today. So things like machine learning at that time, machine learning, augmented reality, IoT, mixed reality, you name it, kind of the bucket list of just say buzzwords that are actually now there's kind of a there. But at that point, they were just kind of buzzwords. And so the challenge for us at Bechtel putting together the Office of Innovation was that we didn't really have a playbook to work with. I think Jeff and I have talked a bit about organizational change management in general. It's, every industry has its own flavor and construction has a lot of challenges within it that we just kind of learned on the fly. And so I'm happy to kind of discuss those learnings here today with Jeff. I can also talk a little bit about kind of my segue since Bechtel into the construction technology startup and construction technology consulting space. But yeah, I'm happy and looking forward to just kind of sharing some of those experiences with you today.
Awesome. Yeah, thanks so much. And it's interesting when you were naming all those acronyms, I wanted to yell bingo. I filled out my, BS card, but you're right. There was particularly in the 2010s, there was a lot of interest, but not always a lot of direction in terms of which way innovation in general was going. It was a very divergent time in the industry. And I think a lot of companies were putting a few chips in different places, but not really going all in on any one technology. And obviously that's changed now with the advent of AI. But before we get to that, back in the day, how did you manage a portfolio of innovations within a large company? And not just how did you manage the technology, but also how did you manage those competing interests among executives who may have had an interest in one technology over another, maybe because it served their project, or maybe it was a better technology? Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, I think the biggest takeaway, the biggest learning from that experience is that within large construction organizations, it's honestly less about the technology. Like you said, a lot of it is about the air cover provided by executives and leaders within the company to allow people to kind of go out and explore and test out new ideas and new concepts and new technologies in real time. And so I actually give Bechtel a lot of credit. If folks don't know, Bechtel's a private company. And so Brendan Bechtel in particular had the foresight to see kind of, where things were headed and provided us with that air cover to kind of go out and explore and do what we needed to do to really modernize what is a somewhat antiquated industry, right? Construction. So there's that executive support that's really important. I think what I quickly learned at Bechtel was that despite all of the amazing technology we have, and honestly, in 2015, a lot of it was buzzwords. There wasn't a lot of there with some of this tech, but it was advancing rapidly, and so we had to quickly figure out who in the field we could work with to actually get stuff done on projects. And so there's a number of options here. You can put together an innovation lab. You can put together kind of an ideation workshop where you just kind of have a Dropbox for ideas for folks to kind of hand off their best ideas. And then there's also just kind of getting out on projects and piloting stuff and seeing what works. And my focus is really kind of on the piloting side and understanding kind of field user intent and where people were on that spectrum of engagement. And, I oftentimes go back to Moore's concept of crossing the chasm, right? So you've got a lot of innovators, early adopters, and folks in the early majority. And so the challenge really is in a 10,000, 20,000 person organization, going and finding those innovators and early adopters out in the field on project is a challenge in and of itself. And so I learned through the course of helping to put together the Office of Innovation that the kind of the first step in this innovation journey is identifying those innovators and early adopters and really engaging them and kind of bringing them into your orbit. So that when a new technology or a new idea or a new concept comes through the door, you know whose sleeve to pull out in the field and out on project to actually get things done and implemented.
I love that visual, whose sleeve to pull. And one thing that you touched on is a great framework, and this being a strategy podcast, I always like to double click on frameworks. But you talked about just ideation sessions, right? Just culling the collective knowledge of an organization at any point in time is obviously a low barrier to entry. And there's a chance that you can, it's like panning for gold. But then you get that point where you make that bigger investment to set up an innovation lab. One of the pros, obviously, is that it's a touch point within the organization and it's signaling an intention. But I think you, maybe without saying, highlighted one of the downsides, and that is that a lab has a central location, and that can be problematic in an organization, particularly like Bechtel, that has operations around the world, knowing that the needs of innovation are going to be pretty diverse. Is that maybe a little bit about what pulled you into the field?
No, I think you hit the nail on the head there. In an organization like Bechtel, which has a dispersed field workforce for obvious reasons, right? People don't build things in offices, they build things out on site. So, there's this dispersed field workforce, and something like an innovation lab is interesting from the perspective of like demonstrating and showcasing, the new improvements that the innovation group has put together. And I'll be honest, a lot of times it's innovation theater, right? A lot of the times it is showing off to our clients, hey, look at all the cool stuff we're doing. And there's value in that. Don't get me wrong. There's a lot of value in that. But in an industry like construction, like it's not actually, boots on the ground changing thing. And so I think at best, it becomes kind of that central hub for innovation ideas and experimentation and ideation. At worst, it's just kind of a museum for all of your innovation stuff. And so, I think you really have to strike a balance between, using it as a resource within the organization that's actually pulling people into it versus it just kind of being there and unengaged, kind of dying in isolation. So that's my take on the innovation lab concept. I think there's a time and place for it. I have seen, now that I'm working with other construction companies on similar technology and innovation programs, some of the more successful innovation labs are actually ones that are just like kind of greenfield sites where folks can actually experiment with, hands-on building things rather than it just kind of being in an office space somewhere in, downtown.
Yeah, in downtown metropolis.
downtown America.
Totally.
Yeah.
And I appreciate your use of the word innovation theater. That's a term Clark and I use so much, is just, yeah, it looks good, but what's the application? So I appreciate that. As I understand Plaster Solutions, your focus is on that field level innovation or bringing broader innovations to the field level. Can you talk a little bit about your transition from your experience at Bechtel and just how, maybe not necessarily career stops as much as how did your vision evolve from where you left Bechtel to where you are today?
Yeah. So, the vision evolved along the lines of identifying a real need in the industry, which is this missing middle within innovation and technology adoption. And when I say missing middle, what I'm referring to is, there's the Bechtels of the world, there's the Skanskas of the world, there's the Gilbanes of the world, really big construction companies that have the resources to invest in innovation labs and ideation workshops and these types of things.
Right.
But that's a really actually small minority of the industry. The vast majority of the construction industry, I think it's something like 90% of the construction industry, construction companies have less than 20 employees. So they don't need innovation labs. They don't need innovation labs. They don't need all this stuff. What they really need is just increased awareness and an understanding of emerging technology and how it's going to impact their business, and just some real practical advice on what is it, how does it work, how is it going to impact me. And so with Placer Solutions, I was taking a lot of the learnings from Bechtel and frankly, a lot of learnings from construction tech companies that I've either founded or co-founded, and bringing that into a consulting firm that allows me to work with and engage not just construction companies, but also construction tech startups who might be coming into this kind of new industry and trying to navigate it, and understanding that missing middle piece, right? If this thing is going to take off, the only way it can take off in this industry is if you really engage and understand who the project and field-based users are. And so bringing that, I want to say design thinking intent or design thinking type of approach to, exactly.
All right, man. This is a safe space. Totally. I just drew a Venn diagram on my paper as you were talking, and that missing middle, and it's you're a platform business connecting startups who don't have that, maybe started by an engineer with deep technical expertise, but not the experience or network. And then on the flip side, if you are an existing firm, it helps to have some sort of filtering function between you and that community. So there is definitely value between those two. You talked about, when leaving Bechtel and founding here and your various startup ventures or sojourns along the way. It sounds like there's a good story or two buried in there. So maybe sounds like your first instinct wasn't to find that middle, but to jump to the other side and found a company or embrace a technology that you felt strongly about. Is there a story there?
Yeah, no, I mean, that's exactly it. I think, I spent a number of years at Bechtel with the Office of Innovation, and finally just kind of decided that I wanted to put my money where my mouth was and, commit the next, 5 to 10 years building a construction tech startup. Didn't quite work out that way. We moved up to Portland, Oregon, which is where I'm at now, to co-found a computer vision for job site safety company with a number of business partners who are in the Portland area. And yeah, I mean, it was my first startup. You learn a lot of things along the way. I definitely encourage folks who are really passionate about a technology or passionate about an idea to make the leap. I think if there is any time right now in the history of humanity where it is possible to leave a big organization and go kind of stake your claim on something, kind of now is it, honestly. The tools are all here. The tools are all here to really be somewhat nimble and innovative. They were just kind of there in 2018 when I left Bechtel. Simple things like building a website.
I laugh, but it's true.
Honestly, the hardest thing it was a company called Deep Canopy, and we were building an edge computer vision device for job site safety. So what that means is that within the camera itself is the compute to be able to identify people in unsafe or dangerous situations.
Sure.
And obviously we took a number of bets there. The biggest was that the technology existed to be able to do what we wanted it to do. But the hardest thing, honestly, is just finding good quality programmers and software developers who are passionate about construction and passionate about your industry, And I want to say that because there's been a lot more VC money invested in the space just in the past, say, 3 to 4 years, that's gotten easier. But back in 2018, it was actually really challenging. There just weren't a lot of folks who were willing to leave their cushy jobs at Google and Facebook to come work in some old dinosaur industry like construction. It was a lot harder. But we did. I mean, we hired a number of engineers and we built out a product. It was a prototype, and we had early customers, and we got the product onto their sites and tested it out. And yeah, then COVID hit, and the rest is history. So, it is one of those things at the time, you're kind of kicking yourself like, oh my God, why did I get into this? But you look back on it and there was just so much I learned. I mean, a lot of it revolves around understanding the industry, understanding how hard it is to sit on the other side of the table when you're a technology company trying to sell into a construction company. It's old sales tactics don't work. Mass emails, top of funnel stuff is really challenging in this kind of industry. And a lot of it, and what I realize, and for better or for worse, a lot of it is just based on relationships. It's just like, who do you know in the industry, and how can you get in the front door and talk to those decision makers? But, and there's a whole host there. I could write a book on lessons learned about trying to sell into construction, and while simultaneously building a product. But I'll spare you for now.
At the Berkeley Innovation Group, we are a strategy consultancy and AI advisory firm focused on mid-market companies looking to unlock big growth. In contrast to management consultants' typical top-down, hypothesis-driven approach, Big uses a curiosity-inspired, bottom-up approach, leveraging customer insights to drive strategy co-creation. Learn more about our approach by downloading our ebook at biginnovates.com/ebook. Now, back to the show.
Welcome back. Picking up this conversation with Nate after his sojourn into the world of startup, let's move forward now. So you're in Placer Solutions, you founded this firm, and you're obviously leveraging relationships you have. What was the need that you saw? How did you uncover that need? And then how did you go about designing a solution to meet that need? Very basic, right? Startup, defining the market, defining the value proposition, etc. What was that process like for you?
Yeah, I think there was a lot of value in having sat on the buyer side and then having sat on the seller side and recognizing that there's challenges, honestly, on both sides. And honestly, both of those challenges are very similar. So, at Bechtel with the Office of Innovation, the challenge, as I mentioned earlier, is finding those folks in the field out on project who can be early adopters of some new solution. The challenge on the startup side is scaling across the industries, like building a product and then having that product find product market fit and getting that product out into the wider industry and, taking off from there.
Right.
Those are actually very similar. Those are actually very similar challenges. And so the big insight I had was that, construction is one of those unique industries. And I don't know that it's the only industry where this exists, but it has what I call the need to cross the chasm twice.
Interesting. Tell us more.
Yeah, well, as a tech startup, the challenge, as I mentioned, is scaling across the industry. But in order to scale across the industry, you need referrals from existing customers and existing clients to give you the validation in the market for other folks to purchase your product. The thing is you can't get that validation from that initial client or customer until you scale within their organization. And so it's like a two-step process. You have to scale within a construction company in a very similar way you would scale across the industry in order to get the referrals that then allow you to then scale out into the wider industry. And so it's this cycle that exists in construction tech in particular. And again, I'm sure there's other industries where this dynamic exists as well. But it's just really challenging from the startup's perspective. And it's also really challenging from the tech guy on the construction side as well. Like, finding those individuals, getting it out into the business, scaling across the business, across projects, and then taking those referrals and scaling across the industry is a very unique challenge. And so a lot of my focus in my consulting has been around, again, that missing middle, those early adopters. How do we find innovators? How do we find frontline influencers who can help kind of drive and push adoption of these new solutions?
That's interesting you say that it sounds a lot like healthcare to me. So if I have a new medical device or something, like, sure, show me the published paper with the results. Like, well, I need you to help me get the data to write the research to get the results. So I totally understand that. And so when you have this, I'll call it a chicken and egg type of challenge in an industry, is that something that a startup is actually equipped to handle themselves? I know a lot of startups think they can do it, and maybe they think they can do it because they're resource constrained and that's their only option. But is investing in someone like yourself who can help them expedite that process, like, is that the best use of their finite resources, or should they focus solely on the product development and go it alone in this market development piece?
Yeah, the early go to market for construction tech startups is my area of expertise. So obviously, from a very self-interest interested perspective, if folks want to learn more, I'm happy to take your call and have a conversation with you and hopefully help. But that early go to market piece, there's a couple of things, right? One is just finding the right company to partner with. And in order to find the right company to partner with, you have to have your ideal customer kind of dialed in. And the challenge with construction is that there's kind of this buyer's agent dilemma, right? Where the person purchasing the solution isn't the one who's necessarily going to be using it in the field. And so oftentimes you go through someone in management who kind of pushes it out to someone else. And there's a risk there. And so what you want to make sure as a startup is that you're getting your product into the hands of the right people. So that's number one. Well, actually, number one is getting in the door, and then number two is getting in the hands of the right people.
Right.
But my advice is always to keep it small. Like you're early, you're building a product. Maybe you don't exactly know who your ideal customer is yet. Like you have an idea, and you can kind of figure it out along the way. But you very quickly have to move from having the product in the hands of the right people, iterating on the product, finding that product market fit, and typically you have anywhere between 8 and 16 months to do this. But someone like me is able to help in those initial stages of finding the right companies, doing the market research, understanding what your technology is, who your ideal customer on a construction site could be, and then working with you to put together essentially a product roadmap that allows you to not only build the product, but scale it efficiently and effectively and responsibly within your early design partner organizations.
I mean, it's a very compelling value proposition from your side, and it's clearly meeting that customer need. I always talk about product market fit being that the customer's life is worse off without your product. They can't give you up because they understand the value intrinsically. And that's not something that sometimes you get lucky, but oftentimes that takes some work.
The thing about product market fit, if I just
add
something here, the thing about product market fit is like we could spend days talking about what product market fit is, but honestly, when you hit product market fit, you know it. It's very obvious when you hit product market fit because to your point, everyone wants it, they need it, they're using it constantly. So product market fit, I think we hold it up there on a pedestal and we try to define it and carve out what it means. But honestly, when you find it, you will know.
It sounds like getting married.
Too.
A little bit. But so let's go a little bit deeper in that. When you're looking through the lens of the needs of the customer, the abilities of technology, and then the business model, where do entrepreneurs start? Where are customers sitting in that spectrum? And then kind of where do you see people coming together to really find that fit? Is it at the user-centered need? Is it when the technology meets that need? Or is it when a business model validates the cost of that technology?
Yeah, so I do think it's all three initially.
Okay.
Heading into it, you put yourself in my shoes, you're leaving a big company. You have a pretty good idea of who the users are in a construction organization. You have a decent understanding of the technology or working understanding of the technology. And you have some business acumen, right? You kind of know, right. You can pencil it out and figure out like, are we in the black at the end of this kind of thing? So you have a general idea and then you go and take a gamble on it. Like you jump into it and you start testing these hypotheses. And the idea is that you're constantly pressure testing those assumptions on the business model, on the user, on the technology. And you are adjusting as needed to really hone in on that killer thing that is going to hit product market fit.
Yeah. Is there a risk to, I think in Silicon Valley, right, it's easy to say fail fast, but there is a risk in sort of burning through your potential customer base by testing out what might be a substandard product on potential customers, or a product that might have some flaws, maybe not substandard, but may have some flaws. How do you counsel your startups to say, okay, I know it's not perfect, and we could spend another 6 months in the lab and it still might not be perfect, but in the meantime, like, trust me, you need to get this in front of people.
Right.
What's that balance?
So the first thing is communicating. And I think that, your users and buyers are going to know that you are an early stage company. They like to see you capitalize in some way. They want to see some kind of financing. They don't want to just like latch on to something that is kind of fly by the night. So having an outside investor of some sort, it doesn't need to be like the top VC firm on Sand Hill Road, but someone who's got some investment in it to know that you have a long enough runway. So communicating where you are and where the product is the top priority. And then after that, it's really just like getting into a cadence of having conversations with the users on a regular basis and touching base with them. And also just making sure you've identified the right user in the organization. Like, is this the right person to be using my product? Do they have the mindset, as an innovator and early adopter? I mean, you go back to Moore's concept of crossing the chasm, like those two groups, the textbook definition of innovators and early adopters, these are people who are willing to kind of look past some of these flaws, right? So by definition, you should be looking for those folks who are maybe more enamored by the technology or just really interested in kicking the tires on something new, but can kind of look past the flaws. I mean, you look at Tesla, right? I don't know if you have a self-driving car, but
I do, and it's awesome.
It is now. Did you try it 5 years ago?
No, I didn't.
It was scary, man. It was scary.
Really?
You're like constantly, you're constantly pulling that thing out of it. You're like, no, 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 no. But you need the dummies like me to be like, okay, I'm going to give this a shot and put my life at risk,
right?
To give you the feedback that lets you get to, you know what I'm saying, right? So those innovators are folks that are just kind of, they love the technology. I mean, I love my Tesla. And I was willing to look past some flaws in it early on, and so here we are today.
Yeah, that's a great analogy in that respect. So as we move forward, you talked about finding those innovators in the company. Are there other roles or personas that as a startup you should look for within an organization to help you build that beachhead, right? Even if, Nate, even if you're a bleeding edge user of new technology, you're not going to be enough to get my product piloted within an organization. So what does that initial cohort or cluster look like that gets a new company a beachhead in an established organization?
Yeah, and this is something that, through Placer Solutions, I really focus on, particularly with large construction organizations. But there's a survey that I work with leadership to put together that goes out to the organization. And what that survey does is it really focuses in on who exactly those frontline influencers are. And there's an analysis that we do on the back end that not only allows us to find who those frontline influencers are, but it's able to find kind of 4 distinct groups within the construction organization of different types of innovators or early adopters in the organization. And through this network analysis, we can find, those tech champions. So those are the folks who are already kind of advocates for technology within the organization, preferably kind of at the field and project level. So they're already having those organic conversations with their coworkers and their colleagues about technology, and they're seen as being kind of a leader in technology, or at least kind of one of those innovators. So there's those folks, and then there's like amplifiers, and the network analysis is really good at finding the tech champions and the amplifiers. And what the amplifiers are is that they're maybe not as central as the tech champions, but these are folks that are field or project level who are just highly connected and just respected and have a lot of trust from their peers. And so it's actually those amplifiers, I think, that are the most important in a lot of ways, because the tech champions are already there. Like, you don't need to convince them that, machine learning and AI is cool. Like, they already know.
Right. They're already bought in. They've been reading the papers, going to the conferences, et cetera. They get it.
Yeah, exactly. They're already on top of it. And so it's the amplifiers, I think, who are, it's that superintendent or that, project engineering manager or the field engineer who, 95% of his time is just super heads down on the day-to-day work on a project. But like, you have their ear, and they'll like do you a solid if you want to like pull their sleeve and try to get something done. And that, you can kind of leverage their network out on projects into the field to really kind of amplify things, literally.
Totally.
So those are 2. There's the tech champions and amplifiers. There's another one, especially within large organizations, and this doesn't really exist in smaller construction companies, but in big companies like Bechtel, there's what we call bridgers. So these are influential individuals who kind of span different groups, different departments, different business units. Typically, they're kind of at a corporate or a functional level, and so they have visibility over the entire organization. But these are the folks that are going to allow us to cross that initial chasm within the construction organization. So once we nail our pilot on that one project and we want to go scale kind of enterprise wide onto different projects, it's the bridgers who are going to help us facilitate that process. The last group are just call them adoption ready employees and just kind of the folks who are out there. They're somewhat on the periphery. They might not be fully convinced, but they're kind of open to change based on who their connections are in the organization.
And that cohort is actually very interesting because their motivations are so diverse. Some people may have read an article about AI taking their job and they're proactively trying to upskill themselves. Some people are just so upset with the status quo that they'll embrace anything to try and break a perceived logjam. One role that I didn't hear you explicitly call out, or maybe I missed it, and that is the role of like the executive champion. Is that someone like, because there's a tech champion, is the executive the amplifier, or is that someone else that comes in? How do they play a role? Do you need someone in the C-suite?
You definitely do. And you're right. That didn't enter the equation here. The role of the executive, as we talked about earlier, is important just in terms of that organizational air cover to let the technology or the innovation process kind of play out. Sometimes they can be bridgers. I mean, if anything, they would fall into that kind of cross-functional bridger category. Right. But more often than not, they're just the kind of guys, like if you're getting resistance from folks on a project, project managers or whoever about getting something done, you can call up the executive and the executive can make a phone call and kind of sort things out.
I really can't emphasize that enough of the executive in that role. But what you've really pointed out is that it's so multifunctional. And what I always tell folks when they go into new organizations is, if there's not a head of innovation at the company, just as an example, right? There's a network of people who share that mindset and somebody's connected them, right? That's human nature. We want to find our tribe. And how do you tap into that work that's already been done? Like that's the leverage point, is uncovering that embedded innovation root system, for lack of a better word. That's really the leverage point to get in. But once you have
exactly it. No, that is exactly it. And that was the insight coming out of Bechtel's Office of Innovation that I had, which is, we spent a lot of time just kind of stumbling around in the dark trying to find those folks. And and what we're able to achieve with this organizational analysis with Placer Solutions is essentially expediting that process like super fast. Like within a matter of 6 weeks, every individual in the organization and which bucket they fall into in terms of tech champion, amplifier, bridger, or adoption ready. And so you have that. I mean, it's literally a playbook now of folks in your organization who you can go execute and implement pilots with. And so it's easy to understand how important that is, especially within large organizations, especially if you're coming in kind of somewhat cold as a new leader within an organization and you need to kind of find your bearings. It's an amazing insight.
Yeah. And that's the magic. So in terms of choosing someone with your expertise, that is it. And obviously your experience, but oftentimes it's just that second set of eyes, second set of hands, second set of, outreach that makes the difference. Beyond the change management piece, can we look at the underlying technologies? Maybe if we can just get your perspective for a minute on the industry in specifically, like what's the deal flow or what is the organic interest among entrepreneurs in terms of technologies to embrace? And then similarly from the top down, what are the technologies that larger organizations are really looking to leverage?
Yeah. So I think if you'd asked me that 5 years ago, I would have mentioned something like building information models or augmented reality or mixed reality. So folks on the show don't know, construction has this technology called BIM, building information models. And we oftentimes use it synonymously with like digital twin. It's a component of a digital twin, essentially.
Sure. Yeah.
And so five or 10 years ago, that was the name of the game. And it still is, don't get me wrong. Like there's a lot of inefficiencies within the construction value chain that BIM really helps streamline. And so it's still a big piece of it. I mean, obviously now it's AI, right? Everyone in and their mother knows what AI is. And it's one of those technologies. I mean, I've been in construction tech now for close to 10 years. It's the first technology that I've seen take off like wildfire across the
Mm.
industry. So much of our time was spent pushing technology out to the field. And this is the first time you walk into any construction project now and you look around at the monitors, folks are on ChatGPT or Google Gemini or Claude Anthropic,
Really?
using these tools on a daily basis.
And a lot of times that is an insight that only comes from experience. In my observation, it's a technology that doesn't have to be pushed onto the user. There's a pull demand there,
Yeah,
right? Because
yeah,
clearly folks can still build projects without a digital twin. It's a nice to have. There's some efficiencies when you're at a certain scale. But as you said, in such a highly fragmented industry, most companies, 90% of companies are 20 employees or less. Like, right, that's a nice to have, not a need to have. But
right.
again, if you're a knowledge worker, a conversation I had earlier on the topic, if you're a knowledge worker, is AI delivering that 10% efficiency to you in your day to day? It should be by now. And so that's, I guess, maybe help folks compare and contrast, where if I'm an individual contributor or an engineer on a project, sure, I have ChatGPT on my screen and that's helping me expedite those workflows. But compare and contrast that with how larger organizations are implementing it. I mean, is it they're literally just buying Copilot licenses for people, or is it starting to find its way more deeply embedded into some of the existing processes of the industry?
Yeah. No, I think that's it. I think I typically put construction companies into one of three buckets, right? There's the ones who have, call it an AI steering committee or some executive level group who is helping to steer the strategy and the direction and the compliance of the use of AI tools in the business. It's a small minority, right? That's like quite a small minority of construction companies actually are doing that. There's another bucket of folks, and again, typically the smaller, mid-sized construction companies, the executives are somewhat aware of AI. They know what it is. They probably use ChatGPT on a daily basis, but there's no like real plan for what to do with it in the business. And then the third bucket, and it's probably the biggest one, it is the biggest one in construction. It's just head in the sand, not even thinking about it, not putting together a plan of action or a strategy in place for how we're going to use it in our organization. And so, I mean, I think it goes without saying that that third bucket is not the one you want to be in. I think the
Right.
pace of the pace of this technology is such that in the next 5 to 10 years, either a construction company is going to reinvent itself as a technology company, or a technology company is going to become a construction company and disrupt the entire industry. So it's really important to get ahead of this stuff now. That being said, back to the BIM and AI thing, like if you're a 20-person company, like BIM's really expensive. Like those digital twins are not inexpensive. And so a lot of times you just don't have the resources to invest in it. ChatGPT, you can get a subscription for like $20 a month. And it's like death by a thousand cuts. Like it's helping you on the periphery on so much stuff as a knowledge worker that it makes up the first time you use it, the ROI is there from the $20. And it's like, it's
Yeah.
obvious. It's like, you don't have to like pencil out what the ROI is, but like you use it and you're like, holy cow, this thing is like really valuable. I liken AI and ChatGPT and these large language models to Excel. And I think that's the clearest
Talk
parallel
to
in
me.
terms of technology. I had a podcast earlier with construction finance guys, and so he was really into this analogy as well. But the idea is that accountants kind of freaked out over Excel back in the day. They're like, oh my God, Excel's going to take our jobs. It's going to do everything we can do. And it didn't. I mean, as we know, accountants still exist. What it did was it really helped them on the periphery on so many things that they just couldn't live without it. And
Right.
I think ChatGPT is going to do that on a much wider scale.
I laugh because that's the analogy that I use. Excel might have put some bookkeepers out of business, right? If you're keeping a manual ledger, yeah, you're screwed. But if you think about it's Excel has literally turned everyone with a laptop into the potential to be a data
I might have
scientist.
I might have read that from you, Jeff. I'm sorry if I bit your
No, no,
style.
no, no. It just came back to me full circle. And I am
Got
so
it.
full right now
Perfect.
that my story came back to me. I'm beyond happy. I'm beyond happy. Don't pop my bubble, Nate.
It's a great analogy. No, if you came up with that, it is an amazing analogy.
Don't pop my bubble. This is great. No, very, very, very cool. So, all right, back to the chat here. So if you think about it, like is AI like fairy dust? Like if I just sprinkle it onto a project, is going to work? Or I think this probably, I might be teasing the lead a little, but there's probably a change management piece to this, right? I can't just give it to people and they're expected to use it. So how do you land that technology so that it's adopted and by employees in an organization?
Yeah. So my advice and my consulting work revolves around what I call the three C's of strategic AI adoption in construction. And so just real quick, the first C is core strategy. The second C is compliance. And the third C is communication. And you kind of have to nail all three, and they all kind of sit together as pillars that hold the whole thing up. But if you have an AI steering committee in your organization, or if you're a smaller construction company, just a handful of leaders within the organization who can kind of create this leadership team, really focusing on core strategy, compliance, and communication. So the core strategy piece is oftentimes somewhat intuitive, but especially if it's a large construction organization, you want to get kind of that cross-functional input to really focus in and hone in on which parts of the business to address first using these AI tools. And then it's just part of the core strategy is also just understanding the technology. And you don't need a PhD in like large language models, but like, what is a large language model? What does it do? What does a foundational model involve in terms of training data? And then that helps informs the risks. And it's with the risks that you then take that into the compliance piece, and you start doing things like updating, legal templates. You start updating policy, and you just really kind of make sure that folks are not using these tools in an unsafe manner within the organization. And then the last piece is a communication piece, right? So it's like you can have all these compliance stuff put together, but like you got to actually get out there and talk to folks about it and tell them what's going on and educating them. A lot of it's just kind of continuous education, and it's something that we've done, with other technologies and other concepts in our businesses all the time. But yeah, the communication piece is perhaps the most important.
Yeah, it always brings me back to one of my favorite phrases of, what happens if we educate our people and they leave? Well, what happens if we don't train our people and they stay? Like that really screwed. So in that respect, I like that you say it can no longer be head in the sand. Like, yes, I get that. And it's a little bit like the escalator, right? Like I'm on tooth, right? Like you can't get on AI with 1 foot. You have to get in with 2 feet. And I completely understand the risk component of it. I've heard that at board level conversations of, well, what happens if we release an LLM, the LLM publishes something on our behalf that creates an unnecessary risk for our organization, and then we're liable for something that in essence we didn't create. And I totally get that. But to your point of that compliance, just building the guide rails, I would be shocked if someone could tell me how they would not find 10% efficiency on solely internal work. I would be surprised by that.
Yeah, I would agree. I mean, I think it is such a transformative technology that, again, it just touches everything. And yeah, the thing I always say, and again, this might be something I read somewhere or heard somewhere, but I think it rings
steal
really
like
true.
an artist, Nate. It's totally welcome, Harris. Just steal like an artist.
It's a pastiche of AI hot takes here. No, but it's this idea of, this is the first technology, I think, that really hits knowledge workers. Like the irony here is that in construction, everyone thought the robots were coming. Everyone thought like manual field employees were going to get, outsourced to AI and robots, and like bricklaying robots and, hanger drilling robots and all of these things. And I mean, those exist to some varying degrees. But it's actually not the manual laborers, it's the field non-manuals who are being most disrupted by this technology. And so there's a little bit of an irony there. That being said, I don't think that the idea of, all of our jobs are going to go away is founded in a lot of reality, because the reality of a construction site is that you have to actually not just know a bunch of stuff, you have to then use all of that information in a way that facilitates delivery of a construction project. And so AI is not going to take that relationship, that facilitation. You still need someone who can translate the knowledge into something that is knowledgeable. And so I say that there's going to be this transition from knowledge workers to knowledgeable workers as AI takes off in the industry.
I'm writing that down. So yes, I am taking physical notes on a conversation about AI. I just want the irony of that to set in with the audience here.
Love it.
Yeah, it's something about kinesthetic, right? Just helps the information
It's the
sink
brain.
in.
It's the brain hand connection that just
It
like there's
is.
a connection there that just makes it actually
It
stick.
is.
Yeah, I know
Yeah, there's
exactly the
research that
feeling.
says that, right? Just I think a very low hanging fruit. Just a friend of mine was like, "Yeah, I put this 20-page PDF for work into ChatGPT, and it summarized it for me." And I'm not saying your retention is that great after reading 20 pages. Maybe something that could have been 10 pages. But the point being is, if I take 20 pages into 5, 10 bullet points, the retention on that is lower than if you actually engage with the work. And so in that respect, it probably actually dovetails nicely into maybe a final question on my end is obviously your personal opinion, but as you observe startups and existing companies, what does this integration look like? And what is that future where, human augmented AI, or I should say the other round, AI augmented humans, right? Humans are the core, AI is augmenting them. What's your feeling there about that?
Yeah, I mean, I think we're at the beginning stages of it, so I think that there is some indication of how this will play out. The biggest is that there's going to be a breakdown in terms of just caring or realizing that you're not talking to a human person. Like that email from your design partner very well was not written by a person; it was written by an AI.
Yeah.
Um, and so, you similarly are going to be using AI tools to then respond to that design partner or that trade partner or whoever else is out there. And so you're going to have these AI agents who are just kind of out there. It's like you're right in your left hand. Like you're going to have a bunch of hands now of AI agents who are just doing different stuff for you on a construction project. And for folks that don't know, construction is all about coordination. It's just a massive coordination challenge. And so I actually think there's a lot of efficiency gains there, just having those AI agents assigned to different tasks, keeping tabs on different things on the construction project, and then leveraging them to not even stay ahead of things, like not even predict the future, but just like here and now, make it more efficient for me to draft an email, make it more efficient for me to review this P6 schedule that just came through from a supplier. Really kind of those types of activities. Um,
Mm-hmm.
so I think it's going to be very peripheral in the next 1 to 5 years in that way. It's just going to be a lot less looking for stuff, put it that way.
Yeah.
You know,
I one of the biggest frustrations I have with AI is that it can't read my mind. And
that's a good thing.
right, that today that's a good thing, and I think it's my intention there is that it speaks to this point that humans are still going, just like you are that connection between the large organization and the startup, that connective tissue. Humans are going to, AI can be a piece to enhance that connective tissue per se, but I'm very skeptical of anyone that thinks it's going to replace that connection role between individuals, organizations, vendors, customers, etc. I still foresee that being the realm of people for some time.
Yeah, I agree. Completely agree. I hope
Absolutely.
so. I hope that's the case for a long time.
Yeah. Or as my friend Martin says, he said, we're talking about our kids, and he said, well, I tell them to either learn how to fix people, fix animals, or fix robots, and then they'll have an AI proof career. So that's one piece. I'd just like to wrap every conversation, Nate, with the same question, and that is, what is one thing that we haven't talked about that you think our listeners should know?
Ooh, I think we've hit a lot of them. Folks should check out my 2025 AI Excellence in Construction Virtual Summit coming up on April 2nd. So we're pulling together a number of thought leaders, both on the builder side. So, we have Zachary Group, we have Sun Construction, we have Fortis Construction, and senior leaders within those organizations who are focused on AI. And then on the other side, we have a lot of leading technology providers like Microsoft and Procore and PrimePoint. And so, having the builder track and the tech track, if folks are interested in AI construction, it's a great opportunity. It's very affordable. It's all virtual. You can tune in from anywhere in the world. So go check that out at placersolutions.io.
And we will link to that in the chat. So thanks for sharing that. And I'll add it to my calendar as well. So very cool there. Nate, I want to just thank you for that. Anything else that people should know about getting in touch with you and what you do, or just reference any links that you may want us to put in the show notes?
Yeah. I mean, you can drop my email, nate.fuller@placeforsolutions.io. And if there's any startups out there, if there's any folks that are like, really, switched on technology providers who are looking to get into construction and just kind of trying to figure out their footing, or understanding of the industry, feel free to reach out to me. On the other side, if you're a large builder or even a mid-sized construction company looking to put together some type of AI strategy, I also assist in that as well.
It's what you do. Awesome. Well, thanks so much, Nate. And thanks you all for listening to this episode of the Big Strategy Podcast.